DBD being an asymmetrical multiplayer game leads to a lot of problems, especially when it comes to determining how well a player performed in a match. In most other video games, if you do well enough, you get a big message at the end of the round that says, "You won," or "Good job," and then sends you home with a juice box and a cup of orange slices. In DBD though, not as much. From a technical standpoint, sure, Dead by Daylight does give you a rating based on how well you did, but the problem lies in what those ratings actually mean. There are 4 different ratings in Dead by Daylight that tell a killer player how they did: Merciless Killer, Ruthless Killer, Brutal Killer, and the Entity Hungers. These 4 ratings are based on how many kills you get in a match. The problem most people have with this, myself included, is that there's no context in these ratings. All it's really telling you is how many kills you got, with no score or information showing you how well you actually played. Things like how quickly you ended chases, how often you injured survivors, how many pallets you broke, are all things that go completely ignored. Hell, it doesn't even affect how much you level up. The emblem system does that, and we all know how finicky emblems are. These 4 ratings don't even matter unless you're going for achievements. Unfortunately though, most players use these endgame messages as a way to determine whether or not they lost, despite the fact that it has little to no impact on their actual rank or points. Shit, what even counts as a win? Merciless Killer is obviously the best, but does Ruthless Killer also count as a win? What about Brutal Killer? Getting 10 hooks and 2 kills would still count as doing well in my mind, but are we saying that the killer who did that only got a draw? What about players who get 8 hooks but 0 kills? Are we saying the killer played bad because they chose not to kill a player by chasing other people that weren't on Death Hook? Showing a rating based on how many kills you got at the end of every game will hardwire people into thinking that the more kills you get, the better, especially to newer players. Not only does this make the player feel worse if they play nice, but it also reinforces way more boring playstyles like camping and slugging. I'm sure you're starting to see the problem, right? This is where the debate comes into play. Despite the game not directly saying that the more kills you get, the better you play, other than I guess tiny text after the game ends, they definitely don't seem to be trying to stop players from thinking that. Sure, the emblem system decides how much you level up, but the same system also punishes you for getting chases done quicker, which makes it really hard to take seriously. This, combined with weird statements from the devs here and there.
They talk about the survivor perspective of, hey, I was playing a game of Survivor and I looped the killer for 7 consecutive hours and I unhooked 18 other survivors and I healed for 93 health states. But then right at the end, I got thrown on a hook and I died, and I don't like that counts as a loss. And the idea here is, wouldn't it be nice if you could do all of that and sometimes you'd get out alive? Right? Like, wouldn't that be nice? That's the idea. That's all MMR is trying to do, is it goes, I know that you died. It's ignoring how you got there because there's too much nuance to be able to make a real effective system. So we just ignore that.
What is he talking about? How does that make any sense? I know you played the game well, but let me just ignore that and say that you lost despite the fact that you probably won the game for your team. Jesus leads a lot of people to believe that killing the entire team means that you won. Because behavior is so wishy-washy with actually defining what a win is, personally, I think they're too afraid of backlash. DBD players often find themselves determining what a win is for themselves. Well, for killers, I should say. For survivors, it's pretty cut and dry, but we'll put a pin in that for later. Most players will probably just settle for sacrificing over half the team as a win, as that's what the game sort of implies. A lot of high-ranking survivors, on the other hand, killers, on the other hand, focus more on hooking survivors as much as possible. Since survivors can be hooked 3 times, the goal isn't necessarily to make sure they die by any means, but instead to make sure you hook them enough times to get to that point, if that makes any sense. While this is much harder in most cases, it sure is a hell of a lot more fun for both sides. While some killer players might enjoy the subtle nuances of watching a survivor slowly rot on hook as the rest of the team taunts you, most players will find getting into a shitload of chases much more enjoyable. I mean, the bulk of what makes DBD fun is learning certain tiles and getting to use that knowledge in different ways against or as a variety of different killers. I'm pretty sure you don't get to use that knowledge very much when watching a survivor die on hook. The fact that playing for hooks instead of kills tends to be much more fun and skillful, many people think that Dead by Daylight should be worked around getting as many hooks as possible as a win condition. If you can't tell by the way I've talked about this whole thing, I'm kind of on the hook side. I personally believe that reinforcing kills over everything else would just make the game less fun over time. People being focused on only eliminating the survivor team would lead to a lot of situations where nobody is having a good time. Agonizing strategies like slugging, camping, tunneling, and 3genning would all become far more common than they are now. Why else do you think She Who Shall Not Be Named has the highest kill rate in DBD? It's because some people are way more than comfortable when it comes to holding out games for a really long time to secure kills, and that problem would only be amplified if behavior came out and said, hey, getting kills means you won, even if they've kind of already said that. Of course, the conversation is a bit more in depth than that. There are a lot of angles to it, and I do understand why players are concerned with things being switched up so much, especially because of behavior's track record of trying new things. They tend to fumble the bag when it comes to that.
Wow, I need a minute to think about this.
The biggest issue I see most people having with defining wins by how many hooks you get is that DBD would have to fundamentally change to make that work. Dead by Daylight has been around for a long time, and even though there have been significant changes over the years, the core gameplay is basically the exact same. The game wasn't really built around hooking each survivor 3 times, so they'd have to change a lot to make that work. And I'm pretty sure they aren't going to. For a niche multiplayer game, Deceased by Dawn has definitely earned its keep. Clearly they're doing something right, and I think changing the goal of all matches so much is a really scary task for them. If anything, this sort of big change would have to happen over years. Each patch changes something just a little and continues to push the game further towards that goal. At the very least, they'd have to make it a huge update that shakes up everything about DBD. To be fair, they haven't shied away from doing that before. I mean, they shook up the entire meta with one patch and it was pretty awesome and made the game much more interesting for a time, so who knows? Will it happen soon? I doubt it, but that's up for behavior to decide. Regardless, much would have to change about the game to make it work, and we'll have to see whether or not behavior decides to push the game in that direction. I don't see that happening anytime soon. Another really big concern I see from people about this topic is the fear that if the game makes this change, killer players will have a much harder time winning. The stronger killers probably wouldn't be affected, but weaker killers? You betcha. Going for the most hooks possible as a killer is hard. If behavior decided to make moves towards hooks being the meta, would we trust them to make weaker killers stronger so they could excel at it too? Not only that, but making this change would also massively nerf killers that rely on snowballing for pressure, like the twins. While focusing on hooking would definitely make boring strategies for survivors less prominent, it would also punish killers that need those strategies sometimes. Now, the fact that select killers need those strategies to win is without a doubt behavior's fault. We also have to consider the fact that DBD is known for its large variation of killer playstyles. Would changing the method of winning to something very specific and balancing or reworking killers around that sacrifice some of the game's variety? Something like that would take a lot of testing, which is why I wish behavior would utilize their PTB more for a large amount of different experiments and using players to test them. Consistent patches pushing the game in the direction of a hook meta would need to address everything. The strength of every killer would need to be looked at in some capacity. Strong killers can go for hooks over kills nowadays for sure, but it also depends on how good the player is with them. It's incredibly important to remember that most Dead by Daylight players play the game casually. I mean, if you're watching this video, there's a good chance you have a decent amount of hours in DBD, or are at least invested enough in the game to pay attention to conversations surrounding it, or you know, maybe you just had this video recommended to you for no reason and thought, hey, why the hell not? Which, hey, how you doing? You should subscribe. I make Roblox videos and makeup tutorials. I worry if that the condition to win, or at least the condition to win better, is made more complicated, it'll drive newer players away. I can see people getting frustrated at being told they didn't play well because they killed everyone by only hooking them once or something. That would definitely feel blatantly unfair to anyone who didn't understand why the system was changed the way it was. I can see people saying things like, wait, I killed everyone and still lost? How did that happen? Why doesn't it give me a win for that? And then something like that can definitely turn players off of a game. Players being punished for playing the game a way that isn't skillful enough would just cause more problems than it solves. Of course, for like high skill shooter games, that makes more sense because you're kind of getting into that for that reason. Dead by Daylight's kind of excelling in the simplicity factor, so making something really specific, I worry would just kind of hurt the game for at least its longevity. You're probably wondering why I'm attacking the idea of a hook meta so much if I think it'd be healthier for the game. Well, I want to tackle every possible angle of this argument to let people fully grasp how I think about conversations like this. That being said, after the somewhat long-ass discussion we've had, do I think it's a good idea to reinforce hooking over killing? Yes. But it has to be done with an immense amount of care. Whenever I see people discussing this topic, they always talk about ways to punish players for going for kills over hooks, which I don't think is the way to do it. Some people have been playing this game for a long time and are pretty set in their ways, so to speak. I'd imagine that telling those players that they need to play the game differently would, at best, upset them or annoy them a little, and at worst, make them quit the game out of spite. But instead of punishing those players, I have something else in mind. Because I can imagine how daunting of a task reworking the entire win condition of DBD would be, I've considered some simple changes behavior could make to reward players for going for many hooks instead of punishing players who don't. You can hook survivors a total of 12 times, and 3 times for each survivor specifically. So how about this? Every time you reach 6 total hook states, you gain double blood points for the rest of the match. Okay? Alright, hear me out. It's about to get a little crazy in here. You hook 9, that's triple blood points, baby. We're going off the rails. It's getting nuts. Hold up. You got 12 hooks? We're going quadruple, baby. We're getting up there. We're getting all the blood points. It's gonna be so many blood points. So many goddamn blood points. Oh, flowing down on you. This is getting weird. Yeah, so the more hooks you get, the more blood points you get. Now, I know how greedy behavior tends to be with blood points, but imagine how much more enjoyable the game would be. The motivation to hook as many people as possible, as many times as possible, would be huge. It would be so much easier and quicker to level up any character you want that I honestly think it would make people play Survivor less. You could use the same method of blood point gain to motivate survivors to work together and do side objectives more to avoid the issue of survivors separating and making the game feel boring. More blood points just fixes everything, apparently. Would behavior do this? No, probably not. It would definitely incentivize people to play more aggressively though, which would do wonders for preventing camping and slugging. I can dream. Realistically, if they were to do something like this, it would be like, oh, you get 50% extra blood points instead of the 100% it should be. So even though incentivizing hooks would probably be good for the game, I'm not sure how well it would do long term. It's undoubtedly more fun, and I think everyone can agree on that, and I personally hope they do choose to take that direction, but those changes would take time. I think choosing to go the route of updates that add small things to focus on hooking over time is the way to go. If you make those changes too quickly, you risk alienating old players and swatting away new ones. Problem is, I'm not sure if I trust behavior to make the right choices. There's a lot to think about here, and based on how well behavior tends to do with determining the right branch to climb, I'm not sure I'll be putting my stocks in them. I guess this game being out for 7 years is pretty impressive, so maybe they know something I don't. Regardless, Dead by Daylight has a lot of growing to do, but undermining how much change it's already been through is a disservice to the people working on it. They've done a lot, and despite some questionable changes to some stuff, I think they know what they're doing. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll get that blood point change. Until then, I'll stick to complaining about Billy's overheat.